I watched the joy in my daughter's eyes as she stepped into her new home for the first time, the soft cream walls, the golden light spilling through the wide windows, the echo of her laughter as she called my name. It was everything I had dreamed of for her peace, love, and a place she could finally call her own. But what I didn't know that day was how quickly those bright walls would lose their warmth, and how soon my daughter's smile would fade. Subscribe to our channel, Her Retaliation, for more powerful true revenge stories. It began just a few weeks after the wedding. The villa, a gift from me, bought with the savings of a lifetime, stood like a symbol of everything I had worked for. Isabella, my only child, had grown up seeing struggle, and I wanted her married life to be different. I wanted her to wake up every morning in comfort, in safety, surrounded by the love she deserved. Ryan had seemed perfect. Charming, educated, well-spoken, the kind of man who could make anyone believe he was the answer to a mother's prayers. When he came to ask for Isabella's hand, he spoke with respect, almost reverence. "Mrs. Green," he said, "I'll take care of your daughter like she's a queen." Those words had melted me. After all the sleepless nights and endless sacrifices, I thought finally, someone who will love her as much as I do. The wedding was beautiful, simple, yet elegant. I remember watching Isabella walk down the aisle, her eyes bright with tears, her smile trembling with happiness. I had handed her the villa's key that day, wrapped in a white ribbon tucked in a velvet box. Everyone gasped when they realized what I was giving her. A villa. Ryan's father, Greg, had asked in surprise. Yes, I'd replied with a proud smile, for my daughter's new beginning. Ryan had hugged me tightly, thanking me over and over again. But as his arms held me, I felt something, a stiffness, a calculation in his voice. I brushed it off. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe I was just emotional. The first few days after their honeymoon were perfect. Isabella sent me photos of the house, the living room decorated with flowers, Ryan making breakfast, the two of them laughing over coffee. It looked like everything I had ever wanted for her. Then one morning I got a call. "Mom," she said softly, her voice shaking a little, "Ryan's parents are coming to stay for a while, just until they finish some repairs at their place." "Oh, that's nice," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Family time is good." I didn't know a while would turn into forever. Within a week, the villa that had felt open and bright began to close in on her. Ryan's mother, Mrs. Porter, was loud, demanding, and sharp-tongued. She criticized everything from the color of the curtains to the way Isabella folded laundry. "My son deserves better," she would often mutter loud enough for Isabella to hear. Then Ryan's father, Greg, started bringing in his things, first a suitcase, then tools, then furniture. "It's just until next month," he'd said, but next month never came. By the third week, Ryan's younger sister, Lily, had moved in too, claiming she needed space to study. The once quiet villa was now a noisy, crowded house full of opinions, footsteps, and laughter that wasn't kind. When I visited, I noticed small changes in Isabella's face. The sparkle in her eyes had dulled. Her smile felt practiced. Her hands trembled when she poured tea. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" I asked one afternoon as we sat in the garden. "Of course, Mom," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "They're just adjusting." But when Ryan came outside, she went silent. He walked with a certain arrogance now, a smugness that hadn't been there before. "Mom," he said with an easy grin, "you've spoiled us with this villa. My family loves it here. It feels like home." He emphasized the word home, and I noticed Isabella flinch. After that, my daughter called less often. When I tried visiting, Mrs. Porter would greet me with a polite but cold smile. "Isabella's busy," she'd say, almost blocking the door with her presence. "You know how housewives are always something to do." Housewife. That word stung. Isabella had been an artist. She painted every day, filling her canvas with color and life. But when I asked about her art, she said she hadn't had time lately. Weeks turned into months. The villa that was meant to be her dream became her prison. Ryan's family took over every room, their clothes in every closet, their voices in every hall. Even the bedroom she once decorated with pastel curtains now had his mother's heavy maroon drapes. One day, I decided to arrive unannounced. When I stepped inside, the place was unrecognizable, cluttered, loud, filled with people who didn't belong. And there she was, my daughter, standing in the kitchen, her hands covered in soap and water, washing dishes while Mrs. Porter sat comfortably on the couch watching television. I felt something in me break. Isabella, I said quietly. She turned, startled. Her eyes met mine, and I saw tears forming before she quickly wiped them away. Mom, you're here, she said, forcing cheerfulness. Ryan entered the room then, his expression annoyed. Oh, Margaret, he said casually. You should have called before coming. We're a bit busy today. Busy. I looked around. My daughter's washing dishes while your mother relaxes in her house. Mrs. Porter scoffed. Her house? You mean our house, dear. It's her husband's now, isn't it? Ryan smirked. That's how marriage works, Margaret. Everything shared. You gifted the villa to us. The words hit like a slap. I stared at them, the arrogance, the entitlement, and in that moment, I saw exactly what they had done. They had taken her gift and turned it into her cage. I wanted to shout, to take her hand and drag her out of there. But instead, I smiled slowly, quietly. You're right, I said softly. Everything shared. Ryan grinned, mistaking my calm for defeat. Glad you understand. I walked closer, placing a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder. Of course I do, I said, my voice steady. And you're right, marriage is about sharing. That's why I'll make sure everything is truly shared, equally. His smirk faltered, confusion flickering in his eyes. I turned to my daughter. I'll come by tomorrow, sweetheart, I said kindly. We'll talk. She nodded, not understanding, but relief flashed across her face just knowing I wasn't angry with her. That night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, I opened the file cabinet where I kept the villa's papers. I ran my hand over the folder marked gift agreement. I remembered every word I had written in that document, and the one clause that no one but me had ever read. The clause that said, in the event that my daughter, Isabella Green, faces distress, mistreatment, or displacement within the gifted property, full ownership shall automatically revert to the original owner, Margaret Green. I smiled faintly as I closed the drawer. Ryan thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything. But what he didn't know was that smile wouldn't last long. That night, the house slept under a hush that felt too heavy to be peace. Margaret sat by the window of her small apartment across the garden, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup until it cooled. From the villa, faint laughter drifted, the kind that used to make her smile once. Now it scraped against her heart like sandpaper. She could almost hear Ryan's pompous voice echoing through the marble halls, boasting about how a gifted house was better than any mortgage. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Gifts could be taken back. Margaret reached for the old wooden box she kept hidden behind the curtains. Inside lay the villa's original documents, every legal clause intact. Decades ago, when she'd built that property with her late husband, she'd insisted on one thing, the right of recall in case the gift became misused or endangered by neglect. No one had bothered to read the fine print, not her daughter, not Ryan. She picked up her pen, wrote a single line across a yellow page, and folded it neatly. Tomorrow, that line would start the quietest storm the villa had ever seen. Morning crept in with soft light and loud chaos. Ryan's mother barked orders in the kitchen, his father slumped on the sofa like a king awaiting breakfast, and Isabella moved like a ghost among them. Margaret watched from her small garden chair as her daughter carried a tray of teacups inside, her shoulders sagging under invisible weight. By noon, the first letter went out, registered, official, stamped. One copied to the family lawyer, another to the private school's trust department, and the third addressed straight to the villa. That afternoon, a courier rang the bell. Ryan opened the door, irritation already painted across his face. What now? He muttered, signing the receipt without looking. Isabella took the envelope. Her eyes caught her mother's handwriting on the corner. Steady, deliberate. Ryan snatched it from her, from your mother, probably another guilt note about how we treat her. He tore the letter open. A crisp white paper fluttered out, bearing just 2 lines. Per clause 17 of the property deed, I hereby revoke the right of occupancy granted under the marriage gift. Margaret Wells of Ryan laughed, too loudly, too forced. What kind of joke is this? But the joke didn't end there. Within an hour, his phone buzzed with a call from the property registry office. Mr. Harris, a legal recall has been initiated. The ownership transfer is temporarily suspended pending verification. Ryan's face strained of color. He looked toward Isabella, who stood frozen, torn between fear and a sudden, guilty flicker of hope. That night, voices exploded through the villa. Ryan's mother accused Margaret of manipulation, his father threatened lawyers, and Isabella cried quietly by the window. No one noticed the small figure standing outside the gate, watching the lights burn behind the curtains. Margaret didn't need to raise her voice, the law would do it for her. 2 days later, the second letter arrived, this time from the school. Ryan's younger sister, whom he'd bragged about enrolling through connections, was expelled. The donation fund that kept her there had been canceled, the same fund Margaret had secretly financed all along. Ryan slammed the table. She's ruining us. Isabella finally looked up, tears drying on her cheeks. No, Ryan. She's teaching you what it feels like to take something for granted. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. This woman who once adored him, now standing a little taller, a little steadier. That evening, Margaret invited Isabella for tea. When her daughter arrived, the old woman poured the tea herself, her hands trembling only slightly. "Mom, what are you doing? They're furious." "I know," Margaret said softly. "But sometimes fury is the medicine pride refuses to take." Isabella's eyes filled again. "I never thought he'd change so much." "He hasn't changed, dear. You just finally see him without the mask." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy but healing. Outside, wind rustled through the lemon trees Margaret had planted years ago. The same trees Ryan's mother had once demanded be cut because they smelled too strong. Margaret reached across the table and took Isabella's hand. "You don't have to stay there, you know. The villa isn't theirs anymore. It never truly was." Ryan's temper only worsened after that night. He stormed through the villa barking at everyone, shouting orders no one cared to obey. His mother wailed about her daughter's expulsion, his father blamed Isabella for provoking a Margaret, and Isabella herself began to move differently, no longer rushing to please them but quietly setting things in order as if preparing for departure. Margaret, meanwhile, spent her days calmly pruning her lemon trees and speaking little. She did not need confrontation. Her silence was more terrifying than a shout. On the 4th day, a black sedan pulled up outside the villa. 2 men in suits stepped out, carrying a thin briefcase each. They knocked politely, introduced themselves as representatives from the estate board, and requested to speak to the current occupants. Within minutes, Ryan's boastful tone melted into confusion as they laid the papers on the table. According to the original deed, one man explained Mrs. Margaret Wells retains primary ownership rights. Since the property was gifted under a conditional clause, she is entitled to reclaim it if the conditions are violated. The review process will conclude within 72 hours. Ryan's mother gasped, "You mean we can be kicked out?" "Not kicked out, ma'am. The man corrected, reinstated to tenancy, if Mrs. Wells chooses to allow it." The words hit like thunder. For the first time, Ryan had no reply. That evening, Margaret found Isabella waiting outside her gate. The girl looked pale, exhausted. "They're saying you'll take the house," she whispered. Margaret nodded slowly. A home should belong to those who respect it. Isabella's eyes brimmed. "Can I come home, Mom?" Margaret opened the gate without a word and pulled her into an embrace that felt like sunlight after endless rain. Inside the villa, Ryan raged. He called lawyers, threatened officials, even tried to reach the local paper. But every path looped back to one truth. The papers were airtight, the law unshakable, and Margaret's quiet determination absolute. When night fell, he wandered through the halls that had once felt like trophies. The marble staircase, the goal. Trimmed mirrors, the grand chandelier he'd bragged about to friends. Now every reflection mocked him. He realized the laughter he had heard from Margaret's garden that first night wasn't weakness. It was certainty. By morning, the servants began packing. Ryan's parents argued over what to take, what to blame. Isabella returned briefly with 2 officers and a moving van. She said nothing to Ryan, only walked past him to collect her few belongings and the framed photograph of her wedding day. She paused at the doorway, looked once more at the man who had turned love into ownership, and said quietly, "Mom warned me about greed. I thought love could change it. I was wrong." Margaret waited by the gate as the van pulled away. When Isabella stepped down, Margaret handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" Isabella asked. "The new deed." Margaret said, "Your name is on it this time, but learn from my mistake. Keep it in your own hands." Isabella's lip trembled. "You're giving it back. I'm giving you responsibility," Margaret corrected, "and freedom." From the road behind them came a shout. Ryan's mother, waving her fists, cursing. Ryan followed, shoulders sagging, his pride leaking out like air from a punctured tire. Margaret looked at them once, just once. "I told you," she said softly, "a gift can be taken back." The gate closed. For weeks afterward, the story of the reclaimed villa spread quietly through the town. Some called it cruel, others poetic justice. Margaret ignored them all. She planted new flowers along the front path and filled the empty rooms with light. Isabella began rebuilding her life, helping her mother with the garden, smiling a little more each morning. One evening, as the sun melted over the rooftops, Isabella said, "You never shouted at them, never fought. How did you stay so calm?" Margaret sipped her tea and answered, "Because real power doesn't need noise. It just needs timing." They sat in silence, listening to the cicadas hum through the warm dusk. The villa glowed again, no longer a monument to pride, but a testament to quiet strength and a mother's unwavering love. Weeks passed, but the echo of that slammed gate still lived inside Ryan's chest. He rented a cramped apartment with his parents, bare walls, no marble, no echoing halls to remind them who they once pretended to be. The silence was unbearable. His mother complained about the thin mattresses. His father stared at the television without seeing it, and Ryan spent every night replaying Margaret's calm face in his mind. He told himself he would win everything back. He had a plan. He'd start a business, prove his worth, buy another house. Something bigger. Then he would see that smug old woman forced to admit she'd underestimated him. But plans born of anger rarely survive daylight. The first loan application was rejected. The second demanded collateral he didn't have. The third required a guarantor, and Isabella refused to sign. He met her at a small cafe downtown. She looked peaceful, almost radiant, the faintest trace of soil still on her fingers from working in Margaret's garden. Ryan's words faltered when he saw her. "I just need your signature," he said finally, sliding the papers across the table. Isabella looked at him for a long time. "Do you remember what you said when we moved into the villa?" Ryan blinked. "What?" "You said, 'This house will finally show her who's in charge.'" She pushed the papers back toward him. "That's the only thing you ever wanted, to be in charge of someone." He tried to argue, but she stood up, calm and final. "I hope someday you learn that love isn't ownership, Ryan. It's respect." When she walked out, he felt the world shrink around him, the air thick with the taste of loss. Back at the villa, Margaret tended her roses while Isabella read on the porch. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm again. Early mornings, fresh bread, laughter that no longer sounded forced. But Margaret knew peace is never permanent. It's something you guard. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Ryan's handwriting, shaking and uneven. "Mom, I know I've wronged you and Isabella. I'm asking for a meeting. Please." Margaret stared at the words. Something in her chest softened, though not enough to trust him. She agreed to see him, but only in public. They met in a park where her husband used to feed pigeons. Ryan looked thinner, his arrogance stripped away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I was proud, stupid. I let my family poison everything." Margaret watched him, weighing every syllable. "Regret was easy to say. Change was harder to live. I don't hate you," she said, "but you must understand. Some doors close forever." He nodded, tears glinting under the fading sun. "I understand. I just wanted you to hear me." When he left, Margaret remained on the bench, watching the pigeons flutter up into the sky. She wanted to believe him, but that night her instincts whispered otherwise. 2 days later, she discovered he had tried to apply for a credit card using the villa's address. The old Margaret might have confronted him directly. The new one smiled, brewed herself a cup of chamomile tea, and dialed her lawyer. Within hours, the bank received notification that Ryan Harris was unauthorized to use the property for any purpose. His application vanished before approval. Margaret didn't stop there. She knew Ryan's pride would drive him toward another desperate attempt. She made quiet arrangements, alerts at the land registry, flags at the bank, an automatic notice to her attorney if any false documents surfaced. Every step she took was silent, surgical, untraceable. Meanwhile, Isabella found a job teaching art classes to children. Her laughter filled the villa again, echoing through halls that once carried shouts. Sometimes when she painted in the garden, Margaret would pause and watch. The brush strokes gentle, colors alive like freedom captured on canvas. But peace had its shadow. One night, a knock came at the gate, urgent, hurried. Isabella answered to find Ryan standing there, rain soaked, trembling. "Please," he said. "I just need a place to stay for one night." Margaret appeared behind her daughter. The sight of him brought back everything. The slap of arrogance, the sneers, the laughter that had once crushed Isabella's spirit. For a long time she said nothing. The rain drummed between them. Finally she spoke. "Come in." Isabella looked startled. "Mom, it's fine," Margaret said. Ryan stepped inside, dripping on the marble floor he once claimed as his. He looked around as though seeing ghosts. "I don't want trouble," he murmured. "I just have nowhere else." Margaret handed him a towel. "You'll sleep in the guest room, the one without a lock." He froze at the phrase, understanding its meaning perfectly. He was a guest now, nothing more. Ryan spent that night in the small guest room. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and rain. He could hear Isabella moving about in the kitchen, the sound of cups clinking softly, and Margaret's slow steps pacing the corridor once before silence returned. For the first time in years he felt small again, a visitor in a place that once carried his name. Margaret did not sleep. She sat in her armchair, eyes fixed on the dark window, thinking of how easily kindness had turned to cruelty under that roof. By morning her decision was settled. When she came into the kitchen, Ryan was already there, his hair damp, eyes red. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said quietly. Margaret nodded, poured tea for them both, and motioned toward the garden. "Let's talk outside." They sat beneath the lemon trees, the early sun painting gold over the wet leaves. Ryan stared at the soil, unable to meet her eyes. "I've been looking for work," he began. "No one wants to hire me. They've all heard everything." Margaret's voice was calm. "Reputation grows from how you treat people. Once it's poisoned, it takes time to clear." He swallowed hard. "I deserve that. But Isabella, please, if there's any chance," she stopped him gently. "My daughter will decide for herself. You took her choices once, you won't again." He nodded, tears slipping down his face. For the first time, there was no anger in them, only exhaustion. After breakfast, Ryan helped Margaret carry flower pots to the porch. She said nothing, letting the weight of each silent minute work through him. When he was done, she handed him an envelope. "Inside are 2 checks," she said. "The first repays what you invested in the house when you married Isabella. The second is for a bus ticket out of this city. You can choose to start again somewhere new or waste it chasing pride. Either way, when you walk through that gate today, you walk out for good." Ryan stared at the envelope. "You're giving me money. I'm giving you a chance to be a better man." Margaret replied, "Don't mistake it for forgiveness. Forgiveness you earn later." He looked up, his voice breaking. "Why are you still kind to me?" "Because cruelty is contagious," she said softly. "I won't catch it." By noon he was gone. Isabella watched from the upstairs window, unsure whether to cry or breathe. Margaret stood by the gate until his figure disappeared down the hill. Then she closed it, locked it, and finally let out a long, steady breath. That evening the villa seemed lighter, as if some shadow had finally lifted. Margaret and Isabella ate together by candlelight, laughing quietly at memories that once hurt. When the plates were cleared, Isabella reached across the table and said, "You didn't just save the house, Mom. You saved me." Margaret smiled, eyes glistening. "No, my dear, you saved yourself. I only opened the door." Outside, wind rustled through the lemon trees, carrying away the last trace of bitterness. Inside, 2 women, strong, scarred, and wiser, sat together in peace, knowing the lesson had been learned the only way it ever truly could be, through consequence. And somewhere in a small rented room miles away, a man opened a window, breathed in the night air, and whispered to no one, "I won't waste this." The moon rose over both roofs, the villa shining like new hope, and the distant room glowing like quiet remorse. The story had come full circle. The house returned to love, the arrogance exiled, and the woman who once smiled in silence now smiling in victory. Months passed. The villa bloomed again, its walls breathing warmth instead of tension. The laughter that once felt forced now floated freely through open windows. Every morning Margaret rose early, humming as she prepared tea, while Isabella tended to her students' art projects spread across the veranda. Autumn came, painting the lemon trees in hues of gold. With it arrived letters, some from neighbors curious about the miracle turnaround, others from families wanting to rent rooms for events. But Margaret politely refused every offer. This house, she said, would never again be used for profit or pride. It was to remain a home, not a symbol. One afternoon, Isabella found her mother sitting by the piano that had been silent for years. Margaret's fingers hovered over the keys before she pressed the first note. A slow melody filled the room, soft, careful, almost hesitant. "I thought you'd forgotten how to play," Isabella said. Margaret smiled. "I stopped because there was too much noise back then. Now there's finally space for music." That night, after dinner, Margaret took a walk to the edge of the property where the land sloped gently toward the road. The city lights glittered below like tiny stars. She remembered her husband's words from decades ago. "We build homes so love has walls to echo from." For the first time, she truly understood what he meant. A week later, an envelope arrived addressed to Mrs. Wells and Miss Isabella. Inside was a simple postcard, no name, no address, just a line written in a familiar hand. "I found work in another city. I'm keeping my promise. Thank you for not giving up on me." Margaret read it twice, then placed it in the drawer with the old villa deeds. She didn't show it to Isabella immediately, not because she wanted to hide it, but because forgiveness needs time to bloom like a late flower. Life continued gently. Isabella's art school flourished. Children ran through the garden, their laughter mixing with the rustle of lemon leaves. On weekends, Margaret taught them how to bake shortbread cookies. The villa, once heavy with resentment, now smelled of vanilla and laughter. One evening, a storm rolled in loud, wild cleansing. Thunder shook the windows, rain drummed on the roof. Margaret sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. Isabella joined her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "I was scared of storms when I lived with him," she whispered, "because the house felt unsafe." And Margaret replied, "Now listen. It's the same storm, but a stronger roof." The next morning, the world was washed clean. Margaret stepped outside barefoot, letting the wet grass chill her toes. The air tasted new. For a brief moment, she thought she heard her husband's laughter carried on the wind. She smiled and whispered, "We did it." As weeks turned into months, people began calling Margaret's story the villa lesson. Neighbors spoke of how quietly she had reclaimed what was hers, how gracefully she had restored dignity without hatred. Some called it revenge, others called it justice. Margaret never corrected them. To her, it was simply balance. One Sunday, while Isabella hosted an exhibition for her students, Margaret stood at the gate greeting visitors. A familiar figure appeared among the crowd, Ryan. His clothes were neat, his eyes clear, his posture humble. He waited until the last guest left before approaching. "May I come in?" he asked softly. Margaret hesitated only a moment before nodding. They walked through the garden together, past the lemon trees that had grown even fuller. "I just wanted to thank you." Ryan said, "You were right. Pride doesn't build anything. It only burns." Margaret studied him. He looked older, quieter, perhaps finally honest. "And what have you built since?" she asked. "A small workshop." He said, "Carpentry. I make furniture now, honest work." He smiled faintly. "Every time I polish a table, I think of the floors I once dirtied here." Margaret's lips curved. "That's a good start. The wood remembers the hands that shape it." He handed her a small box. Inside was a hand. Carved frame made of oak, smooth and perfect. "For you and Isabella," he said, "to hold a picture that makes you smile." Margaret closed the box. "We'll find one that fits." When Ryan left, Isabella found her mother standing by the window, the box in her hands. "Was that him?" she asked. Margaret nodded. "Yes, he's changing." "Do you believe him?" "I believe that people can try whether they succeed. That's their test, not ours." That night, Margaret placed the new frame on the mantel with a photograph of herself, Isabella, and the villa behind them. 3 survivors of the same story. Winter crept in quietly. The villa's windows glowed with warm light while outside the streets shimmered with frost. One evening, Isabella brought her mother a cup of cocoa. You know, she said, smiling, I used to think strength meant never bending, but watching you, I realize real strength is bending without breaking. Margaret chuckled softly. It's knowing when to stand and when to let go. She looked toward the garden where the lemon trees stood dark and patient under the moonlight. And sometimes, she added, it's about waiting for the fruit to turn sweet again. They sat in silence, mother and daughter, the fire crackling gently, the storm of their past finally gone. Outside, snow began to fall. Quiet, forgiving, beautiful. Months passed, the villa bloomed again, its walls breathing warmth instead of tension. The laughter that once felt forced now floated freely through open windows. Every morning, Margaret rose early, humming as she prepared tea, while Isabella tended to her students' art projects spread across the veranda. Autumn came, painting the lemon trees in hues of gold. With it arrived letters, some from neighbors curious about the miracle turnaround, others from families wanting to rent rooms for events. But Margaret politely refused every offer. This house, she said, would never again be used for profit or pride. It was to remain a home, not a symbol. One afternoon, Isabella found her mother sitting by the piano that had been silent for years. Margaret's fingers hovered over the keys before she pressed the first note. A slow melody filled the room, soft, careful, almost hesitant. I thought you'd forgotten how to play, Isabella said. Margaret smiled. I stopped because there was too much noise back then. Now there's finally space for music. That night after dinner, Margaret took a walk to the edge of the property where the land sloped gently toward the road. The city lights glittered below like tiny stars. She remembered her husband's words from decades ago, we build homes so love has walls to echo from. For the first time, she truly understood what he meant. A week later, an envelope arrived addressed to Mrs. Wells and Miss Isabella. Inside was a simple postcard, no name, no address. Just a line written in a familiar hand. I found work in another city. I'm keeping my promise. Thank you for not giving up on me. Margaret read it twice, then placed it in the drawer with the old villa deeds. She didn't show it to Isabella immediately, not because she wanted to hide it, but because forgiveness needs time to bloom like a late flower. Life continued gently. Isabella's art school flourished. Children ran through the garden, their laughter mixing with the rustle of lemon leaves. On weekends, Margaret taught them how to bake shortbread cookies. The villa, once heavy with resentment, now smelled of vanilla and laughter. One evening, a storm rolled in loud, wild, cleansing. Thunder shook the windows, rain drummed on the roof. Margaret sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. Isabella joined her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. I was scared of storms when I lived with him, she whispered. Because the house felt unsafe, Margaret replied. Now listen. It's the same storm, but a stronger roof. The next morning the world was washed clean. Margaret stepped outside barefoot, letting the wet grass chill her toes. The air tasted new. For a brief moment, she thought she heard her husband's laughter carried on the wind. She smiled and whispered, we did it. As weeks turned into months, people began calling Margaret's story the villa lesson. Neighbors spoke of how quietly she had reclaimed what was hers, how gracefully she had restored dignity without hatred. Some called it revenge, others called it justice. Margaret never corrected them. To her, it was simply balance. One Sunday, while Isabella hosted an exhibition for her students, Margaret stood at the gate greeting visitors. A familiar figure appeared among the crowd, Ryan. His clothes were neat, his eyes clear, his posture humble. He waited until the last guest left before approaching. May I come in? He asked softly. Margaret hesitated only a moment before nodding. They walked through the garden together, past the lemon trees that had grown even fuller. I just wanted to thank you, Ryan said. You were right. Pride doesn't build anything. It only burns. Margaret studied him. He looked older, quieter, perhaps finally honest. And what have you built since? She asked. A small workshop. He said, carpentry. I make furniture now, honest work. He smiled faintly. Every time I polish a table, I think of the floors I once dirtied here. Margaret's lips curved. That's a good start. The wood remembers the hands that shape it. He handed her a small box. Inside was a hand. Carved frame made of oak, smooth and perfect. For you and Isabella, he said, to hold a picture that makes you smile. Margaret closed the box. "We'll find one that fits." When Ryan left, Isabella found her mother standing by the window, the box in her hands,